Do you love spy books, movies, and TV? Then the Spybrary podcast is for you.
Things like car chases happen in real life. And it's silly to deny yourself some of that action just because it feels like, oh, we should be very serious and craft and tradecraft oriented here. So my way of dealing with this in the Collaborator is almost everything that you see, that you read in this book that looks actiony is taken from real life.
Yes.
So basically that was my rule. If the incident that opens the Collaborators is an almost verbatim sort of reprise of what happened in 2021, the so-called Ryanair incident.
Welcome to Spybrary, the podcast for spy fiction fans. My name is Shane Whaley, and today I'm joined by Michael Idov, whose latest novel, The Collaborators, has attracted much praise from our Spybrary listeners. Let me share a little bit about Michael with you. He's a novelist, director, and screenwriter, a Latvian-born American raised in Riga when it was still part of the Soviet Union. He moved to New York after graduating from the University of Michigan. His writing career began at New York Magazine, where his features won 3 National Magazine Awards. Michael has also been editor-in-chief of GQ Russia. He is the author of Ground Up and Dressed Up for a Riot. Michael has worked on numerous films and TV projects, including a Spybrary favorite, Deutschland 83. So The Collaborators is named as Best Book of the Year by Vogue, and I'll share a little bit about the book with you before I introduce you to Michael. It's billed as Slow Horses meets Red Sparrow in this sharp, freshly conceived, and thoroughly entertaining spy thriller, featuring a brilliant young intelligence officer and a troubled heiress who stumble into a global conspiracy that pits present-day Russia against the CIA. Combining realistic thrills with sophisticated spycraft and witty dialogue, The Collaborators delivers a gut-punch answer to the biggest geopolitical question of our time: how exactly did post-Soviet Russia turn down the wrong path? Crisscrossing the globe on the way to the shocking revelation, a disaffected millennial CIA officer, Ari Falk, thrown into a moral and professional crisis by the death of his best asset, and brash, troubled LA heiress Maya, spiraling after the disappearance of her Russian-American billionaire father. The duo's adventures takes us to both classic and surprising locales, from Berlin to Latvia, Belarus, and an abandoned technopark outside Moscow. Dynamic, fast-paced, and filled with captivating details that provide a window into a secretive world, The Collaborators is a first-rate thriller. Friend of the show, I.S. Berry, is a big fan of The Collaborators. She wrote that it's compulsively readable with more twists than a bar full of martinis. Welcome to Spybrary, Michael. It's really exciting to have you here. Yours is one of the books that this occasionally happens in our Spybrary community. So we have 4,000 spy fans around the world from the different constituencies of spy thrillers. So those who prefer the more actioneer side of the aisle, we affectionately call the Kalashnikov kids, and then those who prefer the Le Carre side of the aisle, which is more cerebral, realistic, literary spy novels. And it's very rare that I see both of those constituencies come together and really celebrate a book. And that has happened with Alana Berry's book. Before she won all her big awards, it was on Spybrary. People were raving about it. And then the other book that's come up recently is The Collaborators, your book as well. So I couldn't wait to jump into it because I know we're onto something good when all the spy fans are raving about a particular book, Michael.
Well, thank you, Shane. First of all, it's great to be here, and it's fantastic to hear what you just said. So yeah, thanks so much. I'm happy to answer any questions or to defend myself or to wherever the conversation takes us.
Absolutely. Well, I know Alana Berry, who's a friend of the show, said that your book is compulsively readable with more twists than a bar full of martinis. which is an excellent quote. And I just want to reassure our listeners, for those of you who haven't read the book yet, we won't go down spoiler strasse. We won't ruin this for you. So that's going to be quite a tricky conversation because of how many twists there are in spy thrillers, and especially in yours. But my question for you is, you've said in a previous interview that the spy thriller, you don't think of the spy thriller as a genre, but rather a milieu, like horror in film. Could you expand on that for us, please?
Well, I feel like it's a framework, right? It's something that allows people to pour their other obsessions into it, because what is all right? What is spycraft as a literary device, right? It is a fantasy of a double life, which is, applicable to so many other things in life, right? It can be we've seen a whole rash of books and movies and especially TV series where basically spycraft is being used as like a metaphor for marriage, for example, right? Like
Yes.
the secrets we keep from each other. I'm actually really excited about the Soderbergh thing, the Black Bag that
Yes.
just come out. I haven't seen it yet. But I've had people recommend it to me, so we'll see. And on the other hand, spycraft is also especially sort of the more fanciful kind of the spy-fi side of it that deals in like invented agencies that sort of keep the whole world afloat, right?
Yes.
Or that stuff is actually a fantasy of competence, right? It's like a myth of like, oh, okay, we're in good hands, or we're in evil hands, but
Yes.
that's the obverse of it. But it's a fantasy of competence, which a lot of people need, especially in these times. It's like there are adults in the room, you just can't see them. So both of these things, the sort of the fantasy of a double life and a fantasy of competence, they're not really beholden to a genre. You can do anything you want with them, and to me that is really exciting. And obviously, no conversation about spycraft and spy literature can be complete without mentioning Le Carré. And yeah, I've always been saying this, and I was privileged enough to review a private spy, his book of letters, for one of the publications out there, and that's something that I've always been saying, that this is just great literature of British manners that happens to take write what you know, right? And that's what he knew. So I think that's sort of self-explanatory, that you can do anything you want while staying in the world of spycraft.
Absolutely. And so in terms of the spy thriller world, with the actioneers on one side and the literary stuff on the others, where do you feel the Collaborator sits on that spectrum?
Well, I don't know where it actually does. I can tell you what I wanted
Yes.
to do with this one. I wanted to be straight in the middle.
Yeah.
And that is that was a hard thing to pull off, because I really wanted to create something that would be incredibly accurate in the underlying geopolitics and accurate in cultural detail and well researched and generally research based, but at the same time leave a little room for things like shootouts and car chases, because I feel like we are sometimes in a bit of a trap with this sort of our understanding of the genre, because we think of realistic as boring. The more boring something is, the more realistic it is, because we suspect that, and rightly suspects,
Yeah.
that 95% of intelligence work is shuffling papers. And again, Le Carré has taught us that the action climax of a first-rate novel like Smiley's People is, it's 150 pages of two people in a room talking,
Yes.
right? Like
Yes.
the climactic sort of scene where Smiley breaks down the. I don't know. I don't know if I should spoil this. Maybe there are some people in your audience who still haven't read Smiley's People. So
If they haven't, shame
who are
on them,
not
Michael.
Smiley's People yet. So
Yeah.
anyway, the point is, the action, what passes for an action climax is very often a conversation, right? And we take that as a mark of like, okay, this is serious, this is high quality. And if the action, if it culminates in an action sequence, then okay, this is Hollywood. This is something somebody has written with the film adaptation in mind. But the problem with that, Shane, is that things like car chases happen in real life.
Yes.
And it's silly to deny yourself some of that action just because it feels like, oh, we should be very serious and, craft and tradecraft oriented here. So my way of dealing with this in the Collaborators, which I have to say I'm quite pleased with, is almost everything that you read in this book that looks actiony is taken from real life.
Yes.
So basically, that was my rule. If there's and this is not much of a spoiler because that's the opening scene of the book, the incident that opens the Collaborators is an almost verbatim sort of reprise of what happened in 2021, the so-called Ryanair incident, where a plane with a dissident on board was flying over Belarus, going, in reality, was from Athens to Vilnius. In my book, it's from Istanbul to Riga. That's literally the only change. And they called in a fake bomb threat, forced the plane down, yanked the guy off the plane, and let the rest of the people go. And that's the incident that basically, made Belarus a no-fly zone for all commercial airlines for the last 4 years. And so things like that I use in the book, they are, almost everything is based on something that has actually happened. There's another scene that's probably the most, it feels like the most genre, sort of like a most cinematic scene in the book, where basically there's a car chase on the street of Moscow, and our main guy gets out of it. This is a mild spoiler, by having a buddy of his hack the local taxi app, Yandex Taxi, which is the Russian equivalent of Uber, and calling 300 taxis to the same address.
Yeah.
And weirdly enough, that's something that has happened while I was writing the book. It happened in the fall of 2022. People are still arguing what it was. Was it the Ukrainians? Was it just a harmless prank, that's gone too far? But yeah, there was an incident in Moscow where every taxi on that app got an order to go to a certain address, and it created this insane snarl that stopped the traffic for hours. And so the moment I saw that, I was like, oh, I am 100% using this as the climax of a chase.
Yeah.
So all I'm doing basically is ascribing some sort of intent to what happened. But in the news, if the book was real and the events of it were covered in the news, and the news coverage of what happened would look exactly like the real news coverage of that incident. So that's sort of been my little trick, is basically when somebody says oh, this is too cinematic, I get to say, oh, you're not going to believe this, but look up newspapers for this date and this time, and you will see that it's actually happened.
Yes. And I've always said to our budding authors, of which many listen to the show, it's read spy non-fiction, because very often it reads like fiction. You think that surely didn't happen. I mean, even when you look at things like Operation Mincemeat and so reading that non-fiction. And I have to commend you, Michael, because
I love, by the way, I love Ben McIntyre. I just need to throw that out.
Yes.
And I love Operation Mincemeat and Agent Zigzag and a bunch of his books, probably more than I like any work of spy fiction out there. Is just wanted to do a quick shout out. That's all.
Yeah, and he's been on the show, and we've said to him his work, the way he writes is almost like fiction. You almost think, is this actually real? He's such a good teller of the narrative non-fiction. And I do want to commend you though, because I was aware of the Ryanair incident. but I wasn't aware of the mass taxis all being called in Moscow. But it still read realistic, even though I didn't know at the time that was based on a real event. And also the opening was very strong. And incidentally, I was reading the opening to your book when I was on a flight to DC, and I was supposed to be doing some work, but you really drew me in. And I always ask myself when I read a book, what is it about that opening where you're like, oh, put that on hold, I'm reading the rest of this book. So it was a very, very strong opening and full of suspense.
Well, thank you. And weirdly enough, you're not the first one. I have had people send me screenshots of them, like with the page 1 of the book open, like while they're sitting on the plane.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I have to kind of apologize for, spooking people a little bit because, yeah, it must be, a little unpleasant to like sit on the plane and like read, that first line when it's like, oh, there's a MiG outside the window. And
Yeah.
So you kind of like, look, who's this?
Yeah.
We're anxious enough on planes without reading about planes being forced down on page 1.
But I didn't stop reading, though. I carried on,
good.
so I wasn't that scared. So what was it that inspired you to write The Collaborators?
Well, part of it was the serious answer is part of it was I started writing it in 2022, and I don't know if your audience knows anything about who I am and what I do, and there's no reason they should. But I'm from Latvia myself. I've grown up in the United States, just can't seem to shake off the accent. But my native language is Russian, thanks to, shout out to Russian imperialism that made it possible for somebody from Latvia to have Russian as their first language. And my apologies to the Latvians, as always, for not having learned Latvian well enough. And so I almost all of my projects, in Hollywood, in film and TV, and in Europe, because I'm one of the writers on a wonderful German-American TV series called Deutschland '83. And
Love
so all
you
of
at
the, yeah, so
Spybrary.
all of that writing has always involved Russia in some way, because I've lived there for a few years, between 2012 and 2015, and have had plenty of sort of firsthand experience with kind of hobnobbing with Moscow elites and all that, and I've always tried to kind of metabolize that into something. And then, of course, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine began, and I made a sort of a conscious decision to stop everything that has to do with Russia and all these collaborations and co-productions and projects that had Russia as as a setting, or projects that used some Russian private money in financing. All of that basically went into trash overnight, because I couldn't deal with the possibility of working with a country that has just done that, because I had I had friends in Moscow, but I also had friends in Kiev, and I went one step further. I publicly donated to the Ukrainian military, which made me basically a criminal in the eyes of the Russian law. So just to sort of to make sure that that they will not bother me ever again with
Yes.
potentially tempting job offers. So they're like, okay, here, like I'm now your enemy. See you. See you once Putin's dead. And then I just needed a way to make sense of this, and I needed to kind of talk through my first reactions to what was happening, and somehow it started taking the shape of a spy novel, and then somehow I changed it into something that took place in 2021. Very pointedly, it's very important for the Collaborators to take place in 21, because it's the prelude to the war. It's the last moments of the previous status quo.
Yes.
And that was the original impetus. And then the thing that made it possible, ironically, was the writers' strike, because for half a year or more, I was, I was literally banned by, by the rules of the strike
Yeah.
from writing scripts. So I could take this seriously, and I could write the entire book on spec without trying to sell it first and to get it into the shape I wanted it to be in, and then take it out only when it was done. So that was that. And another thing, of course, just to quickly say that things have gotten better since then. But if you look back to like 3 years ago, I was really galled by this like rise of spy-fi. Just these, it felt like the spy genre has really gotten, especially in film, maybe a little less so in literature, has gotten way off the rails into this kind of post sort of Mission Impossible kind of just complete fantasy with like no real stakes and no connection to the real world. And I honestly wanted like to see if I can issue a light corrective to that sort of thing. It was also bugging me that there's like a confusion, a public confusion about what it is that spies do.
Yes.
Like, if you noticed, a lot of people out there are now confusing spies with basically wet squads,
Yeah.
because so many, like, it's actually kind of ridiculous, but like so many so-called spy novels and spy films are basically about assassins.
Yes.
And as I wrote somewhere else, it's like any successful spy's body count is by definition zero. And so that was that. And finally, I have to mention that finally, if you read the Collaborators, you'll probably see that it's basically an ode to OSINT.
Yes.
And getting to meet and befriend just absolutely heroic people like Christo Grozev has been a huge influence on me. So yeah, so that is. It is absolutely a love letter to open source intelligence and to Bellingcat and to people who who basically do the intelligence community's job for them, and sometimes better than the pros.
Yeah.
That
There's a
is, that
lovely.
is I do have to throw that in there.
Yeah, no, and that comes through in the book, and I haven't got the quote here, but you say something like when your protagonist meets someone from OSINT and says something like, "You do 80% of what we do on 1% of budget," or something, and it
Right.
is that that love letter to the work that they are doing. And OSINT does, like as you were talking about with the taxi evasion, that was part of OSINT, that you wove
Right.
that very
Right.
cleverly
Well, I
into the
mean,
story.
yeah, if you know anything about OSINT, like even the name of the OSINT guy in the book, whose name in the book is Alan Keegan, will definitely put you in mind of Elliot Higgins. And
Yes.
so yeah, I'm not subtle about it.
No. Do you? I mean, it's interesting. Do you think that in terms of spy fiction? Because I happen to agree with you, and I'm on record for saying that many bestsellers, particularly in the United States, more so than the UK, are basically Rambo books that are masquerading as spy thrillers. But I'm encouraged by writers like yourself, by Ilana Berry, David McCloskey, Paul Vidic, Dan Fesperman, who are holding the American end up, and actually I think right now are challenging the more, shall we say, British style of realistic espionage novels, and yourself coming through with Collaborators. It's really exciting for us to see.
I'm an unabashed Anglophile when it comes to spy fiction. There's no question who invented it and who perfected it. And we don't have to even, mention Le Carré one more time, because it goes well beyond him. It goes well beyond, like Eric Embler and Len Dayton. We're talking Graham Greene. We're talking the source is there, and it's always been there. And so to go into like a little bookshop in Cambridge, like I did a couple of months ago, and to go into like the vintage spy section, just to see the wealth of tradition that the genre has there, is just yeah. I'm as a reader, I've only begun to scratch the surface, and obviously it continues with with people like Mick Herron and et cetera, et cetera. But and yes, in the U.S., I think the problem. I don't want to sound like I have to be diplomatic about this because I admire, for example, Tom Clancy. I admire the research that went into his books. And for our purposes, we're talking about the ones published during his lifetime, right?
Yes.
Actual
Yes.
Tom Clancy books. And I mean, he's basically his last book predicts Russian invasion of Crimea, and it came out like a year before that happened. And honestly, like I consider myself a Russia expert, and that took me aback when it happened in February 2014, when everyone was still like excited about the Sochi Olympics and things like that. So just you know A plus research, but the action itself, the books themselves, they're basically war books, right? It's not spycraft, it's warcraft. Like again, nothing wrong with that. But like we're not talking tradecraft. We're talking about like armies positioning themselves against each other in sort of most advantageous ways. So it's a little different. It's a little different. I feel like a lot of serious American spy literature is war literature.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And, I admire, as I said, authors like yourself and Ilana and Paul and David, because I would imagine as a writer, if you want to make a shit ton of money, you're probably going to want to write one of these Rambo-style books, because when I'm in airports around the US, I see them stacked high. But, you've gone a different route because this is your love, isn't it? This.
It's what I know how to do. I wouldn't be able to I have to be you've been complimentary enough that I now have to be very open with you. Anything in the book that has to deal with like gun stuff is just an incredibly painful amount of research goes into it, because that is something I like. There's a plot point in the book that involves like a double action pistol having like a long first pull, and Jesus Christ, I had to do like more research on this than the entire rest of the book combined, because that's just not my world. So and if one of the people listening to this like catches me on something, like please do let me know. I am not precious about this. Like I know what I know, and I know what I don't know. And
Yes.
So we're yeah, so it's like I don't think if you gave me 10 years and an unlimited budget, like I wouldn't be able to write like a book that sort of involves military hardware. At the same time, I'm lucky enough to have had an insanely peripatetic biography, and I know a lot of the places that my action takes place in, and I know the people and I know the cultures, and so I steered into my own strengths there, because I may not know the things that some of the actual like CIA veterans know, or ex-military people know, but I certainly know some things about sort of the field that they don't know, just by the
So,
virtue of being a native speaker and
yes.
having been embedded in other countries' sort of culture and pop culture in ways that almost no professional spy ever gets to be.
How familiar, going back to Guns for a moment, how familiar are you with the Ian Fleming story in Guns?
No, I'm not.
So
Yeah.
you'll
Right.
like this one, Michael. So
Okay.
basically, after he'd written one of his early Bond books, he got an email. Sorry, he didn't get an email. He got a letter from someone called Major Boothroyd, who explained to him that this gun you've got Bond using is actually not very good for all these reasons. I recommend this model. And Fleming, this is class, right? So Fleming basically wrote to the guy, thanked him, included Major Boothroyd in future books, and Major Boothroyd we all know as Q. Which is brilliant, isn't it? Because he didn't take offense to it. He thought, great, I'm being corrected. And then I see it online. I saw something the other day. There was a photo of or a poster with Roger Moore posing for one of the Bond movies, and someone's like, "Oh God, his trigger discipline is terrible." I'm like, "It's Roger Moore, for God's sake! He's an actor." It's like,
It's especially of all Bonds. I mean, I feel some sort of secondhand embarrassment every time I see like a fisticuffs scene with him, because
Yes.
it's just like, oh God, no, please don't make this wonderful man do this. 'Cause,
No.
'cause,
Whereas when you
but
watch Sean Connery with Robert Shaw and From Russia with Love on the train, I mean, that's just a brutal fight scene. You can really picture that.
and yeah, well, that's the one thing I think that everyone can agree on regarding the Daniel Craig ones, right?
Yes.
Like he does look like he could, beat up the people he's beating up in the films. Um,
But there was one huge fight he had. I forget which one it was. It was on a train, and he has this brutal fight, and then he takes the woman to bed. And I'm like, who does that? Who can have a big fight on a train and then make love to someone straight afterwards?
Oh, what, adrenaline rush? No, no, no.
Yeah.
The funny. Okay, well, if we're going that way, I think you're talking about Spectre, and
Yes.
a lot of things went wrong with Spectre. But no, I think the funniest thing was, I believe in Casino Royale. If you remember the nature of the torture that he is subjected
Yes.
to in that film, when he gets saved and it cuts to like a romantic scene with him and Vesper, sort of you go like, oh, okay, I guess everything's working, good for him. But
I think I could dig deep for Ava Green. I think I could dig deep there. Anyway, moving swiftly
Yes.
on, I wanted to ask you about what it was like. So there's not many spy novels. In fact, this came up in our community a couple of weeks ago. Somebody was going on holiday for a break to Riga and was asking about spy books set there. So there's not that many that were set there. How does it feel about writing about your hometown in a spy novel?
Oh, it's great. And by the way, I'm so happy that the British edition actually put the Riga sort of cityscape on the cover. It's I
Brilliant.
didn't
I
ask
didn't
them
know
for
that.
it. They just did it. And I'm now being told that the German edition might even have the title Das Komplott in Riga, which is like the Riga plot. I don't know if they're
Brilliant.
going to go with it. It hasn't been finalized yet. The book comes out in Germany this fall, but I mean, it feels great to be able to represent my hometown because I know every inch of it, and so like the bar where Ari Falk is waiting for his asset, for example, is like a real place where I've had meetings, and I know I know exactly the building where his office is, so I know how he escapes. In the delivery guy's uniform, like from the backyard, like et cetera, et cetera. I know where the Russian bank is, and I've put it on like the street corner where there are a lot of private Russian banks
Right.
actually on that block. So it's just it's really woven into the sort of the Riga map, the same way the Berlin scenes are woven into the Berlin map. And I've let the map dictate the action actually, because for example, when my main character gets a sort of a neurotoxin poisoning, again a slight spoiler, it's reasonable that they would take him to Charité, which is a Berlin hospital that's successfully treated Novichok victims, most famously Navalny, but also at least two more that I know about that haven't actually made the news. One of them is a person I know personally who had a Novichok poisoning, and etc. So I knew that he was going to be flown into Charité, but then having lived in Berlin for 5 years, I'm like, okay, what's next to Charité? Oh, there's a natural history museum right across the street. So then that led me to set the scene where my main character meets with his handler at the Natural History Museum, because it's a short walk from the hospital. And then from there I went like, oh, there's a really funny exhibit that I saw at the museum with these giant insects. I'm going to put them into the room with the giant insect models, and as a result, this is like one of my favorite scenes in the book, just because it's so weird and at the same time just completely taken from reality. So yeah, just you can't do that with Google Maps, is what I'm saying. You
Yeah.
can't do that
Yeah.
by research. You have to have walked in these characters' shoes, and then you just end up using the best parts of your experience for things like that. Especially for me, because I, being a civilian who has whose knowledge of how the CIA operates is mostly just conversations with friends and friends of friends in the intelligence community, but I've never set foot there. So it's very important, whenever I can be absolutely sure what I'm writing about, I have to be absolutely sure what I'm writing about. So that was part of why I wanted it to be partly set in my hometown.
Yeah, no, and I cheered with the Berlin scenes because, as my listeners know, I have a section of my Spybrary which is books set in Berlin. I have a complete fascination, which is why I'm also a big fan of Deutschland 83. Absolutely. I was going to wear my DDR football shirt for you today, but some people get the wrong idea of that. But one question for you about Riga. I mean, a lot of us read spy thrillers because we want to be taken around the world. We want to go to different locations. And, I.S. Berry did something quite unique, setting a spy thriller in Bahrain, for instance. And with Riga, I got to see a little bit of Latvia and feel that. How good or bad does Riga balsam taste?
Oh, that's a great question, because I feel like my patriotism is requiring me to defend it, but it's definitely an acquired taste. It's like if you like Fernet Branca, but wish it were more syrupy,
right?
Then Riga Balsam is your drink.
Well,
the locals put like a spoonful of it in coffee. That works quite a bit, quite well. And you can also like drizzle it over ice cream.
Wow.
There are ways to use it that don't involve like shooting it. Like I would not suggest like it's like another way of describing it is like if you think of Jägermeister and then think like if somebody was selling Jägermeister concentrate that you would have to like dilute with water like 1:4 in order to get Jägermeister, that would be Riga Balsam.
Fantastic. Well, for those of you who are watching this on YouTube, if you've had it before, let us know. Is it thumbs up or thumbs down if you tried that? And if you haven't, next time you go to Riga.
By the way, it's I know it's controversial.
Yeah, but I love that. And that's what I love about Spybox is you learn something. I'll definitely be trying one on my next visit to Riga. You also have what I think is a love letter to London. And there's a passage, if you don't mind me reading this out, or you write, "It was comforting to know he could buy an umbrella at the same store where Oscar Wilde or Kim Philby bought theirs. He loved, too, the prickly new life sprouting between the mossy stones, the music, the clothes, the multicultural London English pushing out old Cockney, the sense of everyone play acting just a bit, performing a class, a gender, an accent, a pedigree, a walk. It made him feel right at home with his own form of character work." So you're a big fan of London then, Michael?
That is straight up me talking. Like it's not filtered through the character at all. Yeah, but there's also, I mean, there's another passage that says that and by the way, we all know the umbrella store I'm talking about, right? Like that's a very specific umbrella store. Yeah. But there's another passage there that says that like, well, like the thing about loving London is like it'll never be requited because unlike New York, that sort of prefers to ignore the visitors altogether, the London strategy is like, we're going to sell you this overpriced facsimile of everything that makes us us, and that in itself is a very ingenious form of rejection. It's like, here you can use us as a playground, but you'll never actually reach us. So it's that's been my feeling. I've spent quite a bit of time in the UK and hoping to spend more. But I feel like it's always easier to be a complete stranger in the UK and especially in London than it is to try to sort of infiltrate it in any way, because then you're playing by the very specific local rules of like sort of circles within circles within circles, and it's not enough to have the right accent or to have gone to the right school, because within that school you're like, oh, which college? And if it's the right college, it's like, oh, which clubs were you in?
Yeah.
And it never ends. It never ends. So it's better for it to not begin. It's better just to be an exotic talking animal,
Yes.
like myself.
The other question on a similar line I had for you is whether this was you or your protagonist speaking. There's quite a few musical references in here, which I personally love. So you've got Luke Haynes, Ladytron, Weezer, I think REM. Are these Michael Idov's favorites, or are they just this is the character?
I've used Alan Keegan to basically create a little playlist of my favorite British indie musicians. Yes, so
Yeah.
I love Luke Haynes and Black Box Recorder and the Auteurs. I love Ladytron. These are things that haven't really left my headphones for 20-25 years now. I love REM. Not a secret because I sometimes write about them. Weezer is character work. That is,
Okay.
I'm not a huge fan, but I figured that Ari would be. That's something I gave to the main character. So he's just he's a little younger than me. He's like 8 years younger than me. So I'm the sort of the younger Gen X, and he's an older millennial. So I was like, he's probably like, originally it was the Strokes, and I was like, no, he's not. He's not going to be into Strokes. He's a little too like cerebral for that. It was like Weezer. Weezer is going to be his favorite band. So that is me like just saddling him with a trait. But I'm glad you brought it up, because another thing that's super important for me in the book, because a lot of spy fiction takes place in this sort of what I call the clandestine world, where there's nothing but spycraft in a way. Like, you don't have a feeling that these people partake in pop culture
Yes.
at all. Like, even though sort of people around them do. And I know people from the intelligence community, and they're exactly the same as the rest of us. They all have favorite movies and favorite music, and they also sort of, for a lot of them, their favorite movies are why they ended up in this line of work to begin with.
It is amazing to me, Michael, how many
And so yeah, I
spies-
really love sort of inserting these little things in there. Yeah, because
I tell you,
it's a real world.
It is, and I think we all appreciate it, and I certainly picked up so much so that I went to Spotify, because I'd never listened to Ladytron before, and I knew Luke Haynes, and I went, and I love that, digging down your own rabbit hole. And same with Riga Black Balsam. It's like, what's that all about? And Merle Nygate, who's another talented spy writer in the UK, there was one scene she wrote. She had Mossad agents staking out somewhere in London, and there's this huge conversation about the best hummus back in Israel. And you can imagine that really, they're not sat there talking geopolitics, right? If you're 12 hours out in a cold van, you probably are talking about food and music. So it does make it more real.
Oh, that what's the name of the author? That sounds great.
Merle Nygate. I'll send you her books via
Please,
email.
yeah.
She's been on Spybrary a few times. Great writer. We haven't touched much on your main character. What can you share with us about your protagonist?
Well, Ari Falk is, at some point he says, I describe him as half egghead, half meathead, and I think that's correct, because I gave him a very detailed biography, and he's a foster kid from a Jewish background, but with no sort of real sort of religious or cultural connection to Judaism, and he went to Yale on an ROTC scholarship, and I don't know if your British listeners know what that is, but it's basically an army reserve type of
Yes.
situation where you get to go to college for free, and then you have to do 2 years of service after you graduate. So for somebody, as smart as Ari, who majored in Russian and Eastern European literature, he went into intelligence corps, and from there was recruited by the CIA. So it's almost an accident, kind of his college education, that he went that route because he knew Russian and he owed 2 years of his life to the military. So to like put two and two together, and he ends up in at the CIA. So that's the background that I wanted for him, because I wanted someone whose loyalties are in the right place, but who's also he's not your typical disillusioned or hardened sort of CIA officer. He's more like a person who's used to interrogating kind of what it is that we're fighting for, and that's why when he meets Alan Keegan, who tells him the thing that reverberates not just throughout this book, but throughout the second book that I'm working on right now, the phrase that institutions can't be moral, only people can be moral, and that is basically the main tenet that he lives by, and unfortunately, our reality proves it. Proves it correct again and again and again, and so yeah, obviously it's his loyalty is ultimately to the people he's working with, and to the extent of redacted what happens in the ending, but yes, that is the character that I was really interested in, because again, it came from this understanding that the people I've met who work in intelligence are, in another life, they could be computer analysts or or writers. So many people are drawn, into this type of work by the sort of the narrative of it, the storytelling possibilities. It's no coincidence that every other case officer, I think, retires and writes a spy novel.
Yes.
Yeah. So so I feel like a lot of it is basically, I know it sounds like I'm saying spies, they're just like us, but it's more like us, we're just like spies.
Well,
it's the other way around.
Until I produced Spybrary, I'd never knowingly met a spy, and I have met quite a few now through doing this work who listen to the show, which also blows my mind. So I think if I'm working as a spy, or have worked as one, probably the last thing I want to do is listen to a podcast about my work. And you're right, they're very ordinary. And I remember meeting one guy in London. It was quite interesting. He had, I don't want to betray any confidences here, but let's say he'd worked in the Soviet Union doing this and that. And I said, well, did you study Russian at university? He said, not at all. He said, I was picked out, I was recruited, and then I was sent off to learn Russian. And that kind of makes sense, really, doesn't it? Because you think anyone who's studying Russian in the UK is probably on some kind of watch list. And this guy came across as very ordinary. You wouldn't, pick him out as the traditional spy. So I think you're absolutely right in what you're saying there, Michael.
Well, yeah, it's a double-edged sword, though, because on the one hand, yeah, if you don't want people who are compromised, you have to, basically first ascertain their character and then start training them.
Yes.
On the other hand, you will never achieve the kind of sort of penetration of, in the field that you would with somebody who has grown up there. So the best spies, and we're talking about assets, not case officers,
yes.
Are the ones who have interesting multi-ethnic, multicultural backgrounds, and are almost, just kind of natural shapeshifters in a way. And there are so many, we mentioned McIntyre's Agent Zigzag at the top of the show, and that is a perfect example of like that. Those are the sort of the assets you want, in an asset, so to speak.
Yes.
But also those are the risks, right? Because the loyalties are so muddled.
Absolutely.
You just have to hope that they'll end up on the right side.
I have a listener question for you from our good friend Jason King, who wrote, I enjoyed the book enormously. My question would be, to what extent, if any, were you influenced by 3/6 Days of the Condor? I ask because although I didn't find it remotely derivative, I did feel a strong influence in a good way.
Well, first of all, thank you, Jason. This is a tremendous question because it's something I never get to talk about, and he's right on the money. I mean, not in the sense of well, first of all, yes, the shootout at the office. When you is how can you not be influenced by that scene? But on the other hand, it's the main thing that made me think about 6 Days of the Condor, and actually 3 Days of the Condor more because it's more in the movie than in the book, is the relationship between Ari Falk and Maya. Because in the film, it's, that's the one part of the film that has not aged great, because basically he kidnaps the woman and basically assaults her, but since he's Robert Redford, it's fine, and she falls in love with him. And I kind of wanted to have their relationship be an absolute reverse of that.
Yes.
Because it's Maya's initiative when they do hook up, and it's more of like it's more of like an adrenaline rush type of a scenario for both of them, from which an actual connection slowly emerges afterwards. So it's a it definitely put me in mind of 3 Days of the Condor, and as something I was inspired by, and as something I wanted to do a complete 180 from.
Got it. Well, I'm also pleased to hear you say in our conversation, because there was a question I had for you, was this just a one-off book in espionage and you're going to go off to do something else? But you've let slip here that there is a second coming.
Yes, and it's funny because that's what my agent asked me when we sold the first one, and my agent is the great Amanda Urban, one of the sort of most legendary literary agents in the U.S. And considering that she knows, I've been with her for the last almost 20 years, and so she's seen me change professions and genres many times. She's seen me go off and be the editor-in-chief of the Russian edition of GQ, and move to LA and work in Hollywood, and etc. So so that was her sort of, she doesn't mince words, so that was her question. It's like, okay, now that you've done this, are you going to fuck off and do something else entirely? Or I'm like, no, this is the next 20 years of my life, I swear. So, no, I've always wanted to, I really feel, it's going to sound cheesy, but it really feels like a homecoming in many ways that I get to do this. And yes, I've done things in the spy genre before, again, as a staff writer in Deutschland, and in a couple of movie projects that haven't seen the light of day yet. But specifically this book and this book series is something that I suddenly found myself able to pour the entirety of my experience into this framework. And it's just such a blast to be able to do this. So I started writing the second book immediately after finishing the first one. And I'm very happy to say it's scheduled to come out next January. So January 2026 in the US, with the UK hopefully soon to follow.
Yes.
And it picks up on where the Collaborators leaves off. It's called Cormorant Hunt. Or the Cormorant Hunt. We haven't decided on the
Right.
But we have a few months.
Yeah.
And I don't know if after that one I would necessarily continue specifically the Ari Falk
Yes.
series, but I really love the world that sort of is shaping up there, and the minor characters as well. Some of the minor characters from this is like a patented Le Carré trick, so my apologies, but some of the minor characters from book one become major characters in book
Yes.
two. And I actually love when that happens. You know how like suddenly Peter Guillaume is like the main guy. Like
Yes.
that's sort of I'm doing that with a couple of characters from book one, and yeah, the only problem is that I'm running out, with my sort of strict rule of using only the locations where I myself have lived. I'm kind of running out of locations after two books.
Yeah, you have to bend that rule somewhat.
I have to stop and have some more life experiences before going back.
No, absolutely. Well, our listeners will be overjoyed to hear that you're going to continue writing espionage, because like I say, your book came up on our radar because so many of our listeners in our community were like, hey, I've just read this great book, The Collaborators, and we're sharing about that. So you're definitely on to something. A question for us as we wrap up. I have to ask you this because I'm such a big fan of it, but how much fun was it working on Deutschland 83?
Oh, it was fantastic. It was my wife Lily and I, we co-write our film and TV stuff. The books are solo joints, but
Yes.
but we collaborate on our film stuff, and yeah, it was our first experience jumping into a world that's already created, and we were fans of season one before we got to write season three,
Yeah.
and then to find out that was the final season, we get to like land the spaceship was really a tremendous challenge. The only issue was the fact that we were writing in English for a show that would eventually be translated into German. So you
Yes.
don't have as much of a sort of control over how things are going to end up sounding in the end. And it's really funny because our showrunner and producer, Jörg Winger, was also the guy who did the translation. So,
Right.
right. So basically imagine, if you've ever been in a writer's room, imagine that the guy doing the final pass is also the guy that's translating it in a language you don't even speak. So like, you don't know. He's basically, so it's the ultimate last word.
Yes.
So we're like, well, I guess we're going to see what Jörg has done with it when it comes out. So since then, my German has gotten a little better. Still not enough to write. Still not enough to write in, unfortunately.
Yes.
But enough to at least watch Deutschland 83.
Well, I'm a German learner, so I love it when it combines my interests of espionage, East German history, the Stasi, and Auf Deutsch. And then I'm going to have to get the other thing I do is I tend to collect favorite spy books in German, even though I can't read most of them, especially the Le Carré ones are hard enough in English. But so I'm going to have to look out for your The Collaborators Auf Deutsch. That comes out.
Yeah, das Riga Komplott.
Das Riga Komplott.
Ich schicke es zu Ihnen.
Yeah. And it's also interesting with the DDR because there was a spate of TV series that came out. So obviously Deutschland 83 was, I say lucky, it had the have to have 3 seasons. But there was another one I think called The Same Sky or Under the Same Sky that came out that was also really, really good. But it didn't get commissioned for season 2, which was a real shame because that left on a cliffhanger. And what I liked about that was that the Stasi undercover agent in Berlin, in West Berlin, he wasn't there because he was coerced or he was, they were forced into it. He actually generally believed in East Germany. So that had a slightly different spin, but it didn't get commissioned for the second season, which was a real shame.
Interesting. Have you seen Cleo? I
Yes.
haven't. I've only seen Is it any good?
I enjoyed season 1.
Mm-hmm.
I was a bit nervous to watch season 2, but I actually just asked in our community this week, and they said they really enjoyed it. So I'm going to give it a go this weekend.
Well, maybe I should give it a try then. Yeah, because I'm not objective. Because when I see something that's tonally very close to Deutschland 83, I'm like, we've done this 5 years ago. But yeah,
it's quirky. It's quirky and zany.
Yeah.
It's definitely a different spin on things than Deutschland, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the thing about Deutschland is actually there's quite a bit of comedy in it.
Yes.
Yeah. Sometimes more than I would prefer, but yes, there's that element.
Well, It is. I will add all the links to where our listeners can pick and viewers can pick up your book on our show notes, which will be spybrary.com/261. It's been a real pleasure having you and hosting you on Spybrary, Michael. And thank you for writing an exceptional book. It's right up there for my top 5 of the year. And we're only in March as time of recording. So thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you for writing it.
Thank you so much, Shane. And I hope nothing good comes out the rest of the year.